Hello and welcome to our Masterclass by OpenUp. My name is Gabby and we're very excited that you're joining us today. Whether you are joining us for the first time or you're a returning viewer, at OpenUp we are on a mission to provide mental well-being accessible to all. And one of the ways in which we do this is by organizing these monthly masterclasses on different topics related to our mental well-being. Today's masterclass is on the topic of self-confidence, and more specifically, self-confidence through the lens of courage. This session is going to be led by Jochem, who is a psychologist and well-being expert here at OpenUp. And before we get into the masterclass, a few technicalities. So as always, our masterclasses are interactive, which means that you can chat to each other and also chat with Jochem in our chat function, which you can find at the bottom right corner. At the same time, we're going to be having a Q&A at the end of the masterclass, so if you have any questions that you would like Jochem to answer, you can put them in the questions tab, which you can also find at the bottom right. This way, other viewers who also find your question interesting, they can upvote it and we're much more likely to answer it. Lastly, you can also react to anything that Jochem shares with you today through our reactions or emoticons tab, which you can find in the middle of your bar at the bottom of your screen. All right, without further ado, enjoy the masterclass and let's welcome Jochem to the stage.
And also on my behalf, a very warm welcome to this masterclass. A pretty special topic to me. I've seen for the last few years and the hundreds of clients that I had the privilege to stand by, for so many people this was such a big topic. How am I more confident? So I did feel, to be honest, quite confident when I was asked to do this masterclass, right? So we went into the research, we did all the prep, and then because we want to do things right here, a few weeks ago we did the first trial run. And I was going in and I could hear my mind saying things like, you got this, you're standing in front of cameras quite often, it's just a practice crowd, no worries. And so I went, I did the whole thing, I was feeling pretty good about myself, and then at the end we had a full 30 minutes of feedback, and it was a lot. And I was sitting there and I was noticing that I was withdrawing a little bit. And I was noticing afterwards that I got a little angry and I sort of started hearing different voices. A very mean voice actually. So you see, you're just bluffing, they're gonna see right through you. There you go, you can't actually do any of these things. Very mean voice to me. I started erupting as well. So I had something to do with that, right? I tried to make some space and I tried to make that big turn, and I started noticing myself already working a lot, and then I took a moment and reflected on that. And, well, judging by the fact that I am standing here today, I did manage to turn it around. How exactly I did that is something that I hope to answer somewhere in this masterclass, and definitely by the end of this masterclass. Because today we will look at self-confidence through the lens of courage, very much the topic of today. And we will do that by splitting this up. By, of course, completely forgot here for a second. But first, we do very much like to do this together. So first question for you here today, and feel free to answer this in the chat, or if you're feeling less inclined so, feel free to answer it by yourself. If you had to give your current self-confidence a grade, what would it be on a scale from 1 to 10? My example, when after I just gave that trial run a few weeks ago, I was definitely down at a 3 or a 4. As I'm standing here now today with some of the improvements that we made, even after a little slip up here, I'm still feeling a confident 8. But let's see, where are we right now? I'm seeing a 4.8 and a 4, a 5, a 6.5, some 7s here, right? And this is the point. It's good to know what our starting point is, because from there we can only move up, even if it's moving from a 4 to a 5 or moving from an 8 to perhaps maybe a 9. There's always something we can do to improve our self-confidence. And that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about the self-confidence, self-concept, because no discussion about self-confidence is complete without at least touching on what are we talking about when we're talking about the self. We're also going to talk about then how to build trust, how to build that confidence. And of course, we're going to talk about courage, how to show more of it, and what kind of role does it have to play here. We're going to, of course, give some very practical tips in between the masterclass, so at least one key per part of this masterclass, and we're going to wrap up with some real practical tools that you can start working with, basically starting today, after which we'll do the Q&A. I have 2 promises to make to you at the beginning of this masterclass. The first being, after today, you're still going to feel insecure at times, and 2, it won't matter as much. And why that is, I hope that becomes clear by the end of the next 30 minutes or so. All right, so let's dive on in. That Sabrina made the comment here that people are 10 aren't here. Yeah, you know, maybe they should, or maybe their 10 isn't as warranted. We'll see. But I haven't seen a 10 yet, also in the Dutch version we did earlier today. Anyway, let's dive into the self-concept for a bit. A very philosophical question, right? What is the self? I'm not going to attempt in the few minutes that I have to do this entire philosophy, but I do want to make a little bit of a point here, and I found that experience can be guiding here. I want to invite you, if you have a piece of paper nearby, or open a document, or if you're feeling particularly brave today, just do it in the chat. Write down the sentence, I am, at least 10 times, and then see if you can end that sentence. So in my case, I could say I'm a psychologist, or I'm a partner, I'm a friend, or I'm a cat person, a cookie lover, whatever that may mean. I'm a true reader. I'm very secure. I'm very insecure. I'm all of these things. I'm not somebody that exercises. I'm not an athlete, for instance. Could also be one of the things that I could finish off with, I am. And let's do that for yourself as well. Just take a moment. See some people here. I am a human being. I'm a helpful person. Very nice. See some descriptions here. I am brave. Very nice, Gita. Right. All these descriptions. And if you're feeling extra brave, see if you can also add some less pleasant sounding things there. I am sloppy, for instance. Definitely something that I can be at times. I forget details, or I slip up in a story. It already happened. Maybe also me. Important to have these, because whatever comes after this I am part, tends to shape us. If I had followed up in what I said in the beginning here, I'm not capable of doing masterclasses, I would not be here today, maybe, right? They tend to shape our worldview, and they really drag us with us. So what do we do with these descriptions? Whether or not they're helpful or unhelpful, they tend to have an impact, right? So before going into how do we deal with all of these descriptions of the self, let's take a moment on what not to do, maybe. Especially with the unhelpful I am phrases that we are so familiar with. I'm not good enough, for instance. What we could do is have this vigorous debate with ourselves, and I sometimes find myself, especially at night, thinking this. No, I am good enough. No, I'm not good enough. And it's this endless debate that just keeps on going, right? So maybe I want to do something else, and I try to distract myself. I mean, I had a client this very morning that says, as long as I'm on my phone for 12 hours a day, it's all fine. You know, it can work. Not sure it's going to build your confidence, but it works in the short term, right? And then lastly, and this has been very popularized in the last few years, is these affirmations, are these things where sort of, if I just tell myself enough that I am good enough, that I'm strong, I'm powerful, I can do anything I want, that it will become true. But I'm very much in line with Mark Manson in his book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, where he says no happy person has ever had to look into the mirror and tell themselves that. And I believe that as well. The debate will only go on. Because the moment that I put forth in my mind that I'm really good at something, there's this part of my mind that starts to speak back, perhaps recognizable for all of you. So what do? Well, there's a different way out here. But to properly explain that, I gotta do something weird here for a second. And let's see if we can diffuse for a bit. But let's start with this image here of a lemon. really think about a lemon. Take a moment. If you think this is a weird exercise, you're completely right, and we're going to move on anyways. Really imagine a lemon here. The shell, the taste, the smell of it maybe, and start to notice that you have some associations, right? Maybe you can even put in the chat some of the associations you're having. Squishy, sour, yeah, very good. In the last masterclass, we had somebody that said tequila instantly. What does that say? Ice cream, tasty, yeah, very much. All of these starts happening, right? And it's almost, and maybe if you're a little like me, you can almost taste the sourness on your tongue. It can be very powerful. Though it's also just a 5-letter word. We tend to become very much entangled in our thoughts. In this case, a lemon. It can be all absorbing and we can do all sorts of things with it, only leading us to be more into, in this case, the lemon. And as you can probably guess at this point, this can also happen with these negative self-evaluations, with these assumptions about the self, that they become larger and larger and larger. The more we're busy with it, the more we are fused with it, we could say, entangled with it. And that's the case here. What we're trying to do here is to defuse, is to work on this skill, this ability to look at your own thoughts from a distance and not be so entangled in them. Like metaphors that are often helpful here is to notice that you're having a thought and put it on a cloud or a leaf and watch as it flows by instead of interacting with it so much. And there's a lot of literature here on how exactly we work with diffusion, as the full term is here. And I do invite you to Google that, that's what Google is for. But the quickest and easiest one that I know of is, instead of just having the thought, for instance, I'm not an athlete, I'm not good at exercise, I would place a little sentence in front of it, and it's a magical sentence to me. I'm having the thought that. So to me that would sound like, I'm having the thought that I'm not a good athlete. And it shapes it. Makes it different. All of a sudden, I have a tiny bit of air, a tiny bit of breathing room to do something different. Nice. All right, just checking in with the chat for a little bit. Yeah, very good. I actually see somebody refer to my childhood. This is good to know, right? All of these sentences do come from somewhere, right? They're often shaped by our own experiences. It doesn't mean that we still have to listen to them, but it is good to acknowledge that often these life events have caused these assumptions, these notions about the self to become very strong. Like for instance, for me with exercise, it's just something that I always felt in comparison to other kids, that I wasn't as fast, smart, or strong as them on the field, and therefore I just resigned with that notion. Of course, it didn't help me actually getting into exercise as a healthy habit. Right, but if we have this ability to look at our thoughts from a distance, it doesn't actually necessarily, we're still busy with our mind, right? We haven't done anything yet. Which is, of course, what brings us to the first key here, right? To let go of these convictions of ourselves. See if we can diffuse from that, so we have the space to actually start building. Which brings us to the second part of today, building trust, because we're getting into the more action, behavior-related part of today. But before going into that, I think it's a very good thing to look at this assumption for a little bit. It's one of the most pervasive ones I know, and it's everywhere in the media. It's also been very much an assumption within psychology for a long time. It's this notion that an attitude that we're having, this belief around the world of ourselves, would lead to behavior. So, I'm not good at giving masterclasses, therefore I will not give a masterclass. Or I'm very good at setting boundaries, therefore I will set boundaries. That's the way that it tends to work. Right, more recent literature is also showing us that that's not necessarily the only route. What I would say here, could we not flip the script? Could we not turn that around, and what would happen then? Which would look a little bit like this. We change our behavior and then our attitude follows, instead of first an attitude change and then a behavior change. Very essential, because this allows us to not only are we already taking distance from our own beliefs about ourselves, now it allows us to look at just our behavior. Maybe to clarify this even a little bit more is to look at the way that we normally build trust, confidence even, in other people. Think about somebody that you really trust or that you feel perhaps close to, that person that you send to call whenever you're feeling down and out. Did you have a discussion first, the moment you met, on everything that you want in order to trust each other and have a full conversation about that? Or is that something that grew over time? And I would guess for most people, it's that second one. It's something that changes over time from not knowing somebody to fully trusting somebody. It's this consistency over time. They probably were there when you really needed them to be, and they were there when you didn't need them to be, but just to have fun, and maybe they challenge you a little bit. It's these little behaviors that build trust between persons, and it's the exact same route for ourselves. So instead of focusing, I need to change my attitude, maybe I can focus on what kind of actions can I take to shape my behavior in that sense. So this is what we would like to call act your way into new behavior. And what could help with that is, if we're looking at new behavior, is to go for a bit of a stretch here. So what we're finding is that this comes from the flow literature. We have this in some of our other masterclasses as well, and I love the approach personally, to look at what is a 4% challenge for me? What is something where I could challenge myself as a person just a little bit, just to stretch it a little bit more? Not only is this a great way to learn things and have new experiences and make life generally more worthwhile, it's also the way that we're building confidence in ourselves. Because at some point it becomes very hard to deny that we're doing good when we're having such a stack of things. So what would be a fitting challenge for you? This is a question again for the chat, because maybe we can help each other and inspire each other a little bit. What would be a nice challenge for you that would maybe be in that 4%, right? And this could be different for everybody. Maybe you started out at a 4.5, and then what would your challenge be to get to a 5 when it comes to confidence? And maybe for other people, it's a bigger challenge. It could be like starting your own company, or to finally give somebody a compliment, or to bake a really nice apple pie. Whatever it may be, it's your personal challenge, and maybe we can inspire each other a little bit. Nice. Yeah, this is exactly. I'm seeing Frederico say you present more often on my team. Very good. Yes. Have a relay in front of my company, very good. To be more at peace with myself, nice, very good. Ooh. Follow up on the diet, very good ones, right? And again, it's not necessarily about maintaining this, actually getting the results. It's very much about the process of setting a challenge for yourself and noticing what you're getting. So this is the second key here today. Do not wait for your attitude about, in this case, yourself to change. Build trust in yourself by focusing on these personal challenges and keep track of that. And that last one is often overlooked, but this is the way how you build it. If you ever went into, an exercise schedule to get into the habit of running, for instance, this is it. The importance of keeping track of these things, right? Actually, I'm loving the amount of response we're getting in the chat here. This is really, really cool stuff. I'm seeing Emir say, sharing my art with others, which is, I think profoundly brave to do in its own, right? It's creation. Which brings us to that part, right? Even if we know where our challenge would be, we would still need this sense of courage to actually start showing it, to do it. And that's, the shortest way of summarizing this would be just do it. But there are some things that could be helpful here. There's this notions of bright spots, which I personally love as a philosophy here, is to think about when is it different? When were those times that I wasn't as occupied with a lot of my assumption about myself and I just acted? For me personally, it was a couple of years ago. I had luckily gotten rid, or at least learned how to live a little bit better with my assumptions about exercise. And I was on a run through a park here. And I saw in the distance, I saw a bridge and an older man on it who was carrying or pushing a stroller. And as he was at the highest point of the bridge, he was distracted by something, I don't know what. And he let go of the stroller and he looked around him, and I saw this almost in slow motion. I saw the stroller starting to roll down the bridge and heading towards water. And at this moment, I was not busy with the fact that I had already run for quite a distance and that I maybe could not make it, or maybe I should wait for other people to step in, or I was not busy with any of that. I was really very much focused on how do I get there as fast as I could. So I sprinted and I managed to get a hold of the stroller as it hit the water, and I managed to pull it back up. And this to me was one of these moments where I realized that all of the thoughts that we're having all day, it doesn't really matter until we were sort of right there in that moment. Could it turn out differently? Could it not turn out differently? What was even nicer, of course, about it, there were all the other people there, and they all jumped in as well. So I was holding onto the stroller with one hand, and they helped me get me and the stroller out. And I think this is where it is. When is it different? To look for these bright spots. In this case, I had the opportunity to be a bright spot myself, but I saw all these other bright spots around me, these people that were helping me of their own volition too. To me, that is as courageous as the thing that I did. To have these bright spots in the back of our mind is incredibly helpful. And again here, I'm looking for some inspiration here, for each other here. When was the last time you showed some courage? And why did you do it at the time? If you're daring, please share it here in the chat. What were some of these things for you? When was the last time you showed some courage? What was it? Could be big, could be small. Another example, as I'm seeing, because I'm seeing a lot of people type as we're speaking. One of my personal examples was that much more recently, a few weeks ago, a friend of mine was going through a rough time, and he made some cynical remarks that seemed very grim to me. So my sort of psychology-trained brain was giving me signals that, ooh, if this was a client, I would start asking some serious questions. And then the thoughts popped up, like sort of, maybe this is not your place. Maybe you shouldn't do it now. We're just having a good time. We're laughing. It's fine. You should leave it. But this is where, to me, a bright spot came in my own mind, where I realized, what kind of story do I want to tell afterwards? How do I want to show up? I may not be able to control all of my environments or my own thoughts, but I can control how I show up and how I act. So I did ask him how dark his thoughts were, and they were pretty grim. But more than that, he thanked me for daring to make this uncomfortable, to dive in a little bit deeper, because apparently not many people do that. And that's also where it can be, these little small acts, these little bright spots that do make a change. Nice. I'm seeing some great examples here. Taking a stand for yourself, moving countries, coming out, amazing. Standing up for yourself and your values, very good. I'm liking the thing about values here, because this is very much what it is. Courage is in the face of acting in accordance to what we think is important, what our values are. All right. So that's the third key here. Look for the bright spots within yourself, within people around you, and this is where we can always find some courage. Which of course brings us to some practical tools, as I did promise at the beginning of today. The first one here is to look at some courageous role modeling. Who's the bravest person you know around you? Could be somebody you personally know, or somebody you've seen on television, whatever that may be. If you have the opportunity to do an actual real-life interview with them, that's fantastic. And otherwise, you can imagine doing one. What makes this person so brave? When did his or her bravery, or their bravery, really showed? What was that? See what we can learn from that. What makes them so brave? Why were they so brave or courageous? And also, you want to inspire us? Feel free to share here. Nice, my mother. That's lovely. Nice. What makes them brave? How do they act? What can we, of course, copy from this? Brings us to the second one here. It's the ability to park judgment. Also, another, by pure coincidence, I had this with a client this morning, where we talked about how do you bring these sort of themes into practice. And so when something happens and we feel something, and our mind starts to run on all these maybe negative thoughts that we can be having, is that there's always three options, right? We can respond, we can not respond, so sort of repress ourselves, or to park it for a little bit. And that's what we're talking about here. We don't have to challenge all of our thoughts all the time. We don't have to keep perfect distance from them either. It's just parking it for a little bit. Let's deal with this at a later point, so I can be enabled to take 20 seconds of courage, because that's usually all that it takes. All the courage I had to show today is walk to the little marker here, and the rest follows itself. No way out at this point, right? And the last one, and I could again use your inspiration here too, is to start a courageous bucket list. A courageous bucket list is very similar to a normal bucket list, which is this concept where, the things you want to do before you kick the bucket, before your life ends. Usually a lot of big things are on there, right? But they don't necessarily have to be. What are some of the things that you can do to signal courage to yourself? Again, can be big, can be small. For me personally, asking for help a little bit more often could be really, really courageous for me. I struggle with that. To speak up every now and then when you don't agree with what's happening. Also an act of courage. Again, here, see if we can inspire each other here. Very good. Nice. Seeing some great examples follow over here. All right. And with any bucket list, it's a live document in my vision here. We can keep on building on this. This brings us already to the end of today's masterclass. So again, the 3 keys. First one, let go of your convictions about yourself. The second key, don't wait for your attitude to change. Build trust in yourself by focusing on these personal challenges and keep track of that. Lastly, look for the bright spots. As I said at the beginning, you're probably still going to feel insecure at times, but it may not matter. So don't wait for confidence. Choose courage instead. This brings us to the Q&A. We'll be right back with you in a slightly different setting, here to answer all of your questions.
Joachim, thank you so much for a very interesting masterclass. I particularly liked what you shared about having the distance from your thoughts, right? Instead of saying, oh, I am X, like just I'm having a thought about it.
Yeah.
I think this is going to be a trick that I'm going to start using. I think it's really helpful.
Awesome.
So we had some questions, of course, coming in. And the first question is from Beatrice. Are there any particular studies or resources you would recommend for diving deeper into the recent theory that behavior shapes attitudes?
Ooh. Well, I think sort of any Google Scholar search on attitude and behavior would lead into that. I've personally got it from diving more into climate psychology recently. Is I had a book by Per Espen Stoknes, What Do We Think About When We're Thinking About Climate Change, that had a whole passage on this. And to me, this is how I got to the idea for today is I don't think we talk about that enough, about sort of how we can shape our behavior instead of our mind. Of course, both are fine, right? But to emphasize on the other one, instead of waiting for everybody's convictions to be in line, well, let's maybe start at behavior.
Yeah.
So that's a part of where to study more of that. And some studies done in Berkeley that I know of, but to be honest, it's a very, I think... transparency is important here. Yeah. I suck at memorizing names of studies. So it's a good question. I could come back to that for some of the resources that we had listed here.
Yeah, great. Bianca asks if a person is brave because of negative life experiences pushing them to be brave, how to turn it into positive and not feel drained of energy.
Yeah, very good. Great question as well. I think what often tends to happen when we're there, our convictions that are like, I'm a brave person, I will act, are the very things that come in the way. Whenever I'm doing an intake with a client, for instance, and I'm asking them, could you describe yourself, or how would you describe yourself? But fairly similar as a sort of I am question here. One of the things that that to me started to become a bit of a trigger over the years is a trigger by which I mean, I gotta look into this, is when people said I'm a very positive person normally. And I think it's the same with this. I'm a very brave person normally. What it tends to do is it tends to trap us. Because then, and being a positive person, is nothing wrong with that, of course, but it can be rigid. So what do you do when something negative is happening, or when you are experiencing some negative thoughts, or you want to get rid of your negative feelings and you're complaining a little bit to somebody else? All of a sudden, the critical part of your mind also starts saying, you're not being very positive now.
Yeah.
And it does the same thing. So there, it's, I think my 2 cents on that is to look at this thought and how is it serving you? Is it still serving you or not? Then also even take distance from these positive convictions about the self, because they may not be serving you. They may in fact trap you or make it very rigid, whereas we want the opposite. We need some flexibility in order to be truly brave.
Yeah, I think like you called me out on that one, because if I think of myself like 5 years ago, it's like, oh, everything's great. I'm so happy. I'm so positive. And then every time something negative or, upsetting would happen, it's almost like, oh, no, I can't feel this way because I'm a positive, happy person, right? No matter what, I just need to put on a smile. So it's definitely, I think, limiting. Like you mentioned.
I think absolutely, and I think this highlights, I think, the issue that can make this worse, which is very normal in the society that we're living in now, is that we're seeing positive emotions such as happiness or glee or just general positivity as good. There's almost moral judgment on that, and anger and sadness and anxiety as bad. Again, with the moral judgment, it's something I should not feel. The tricky thing about that is nothing to do about that. It is there. If you're not, if you're feeling anxious and you're saying, "But I'm not feeling anxious," well, everybody can try this, right? You're still feeling it.
Yeah.
And this is the reframing where we're seeing that any of these experiences are very much valid. They should be there. They're telling you something sometimes, but we can make space for them as we're trying to distance ourselves from our thoughts. Is to also, well, it's part of it. Like my example I used in the beginning here with all this negative feedback, that didn't feel good. Of course not. I was sitting there. I was a mess. I had to sort of really take a few minutes to let that all settle in. And then I sort of saw it for what it was, a challenge I wanted to take. But not immediately, and it doesn't have to be immediately. I was frankly disappointed with myself, and I think I could be. And I think it's important that we allow ourselves to be that before moving forward.
Yeah. Oh, great. Thank you. Another question from Avanti, a very interesting one. How to be courageous at the cost of damaging relationships? Careful communication and compassion, of course, but any other tips?
I think the first one we gotta ask ourselves there is, do I value this relationship? Do I really want to stay into it, or am I being entangled and I should be nice to any relationship I should maintain? I think it's and that's not the nicest story, but I think it is valid. Sometimes we're really pushing something or wanting something out of a person that we're not going to get. So that's on sort of one part. At the other part, it's acknowledging that if we're doing this, if we're setting boundaries, or we're doing something that the other person may not like, or we're being courageous and the other person doesn't like it, that's why it's courage. I mean, that's the point. I'm often having this when it comes to this theme of setting boundaries. Clients talking to me, and my boss is always asking me to do more things, and he doesn't realize. And it's a classic example. And then we talk about what words do you use, right? And then they try and they come back and they said, I did it and I didn't listen to me. I'm like, yes, of course. I mean, this has been happening your entire life. It's not going to change in one go. And it's serving the other person that you're not being brave. Therefore, they would not like you to be brave. Therefore, they're going to try. And I'm not saying this on a conscious level, not like other people are bad, but their automatic behavior would probably be to counter that. So it's going to be difficult. That is the point. Otherwise, it's probably not brave. You need that resistance in order for bravery to be there. And I think the only thing that can help is explain that you're doing that. I'm trying to be more true to myself, and therefore I am choosing this, knowing that you may not like it.
Yeah, it's kind of like you're saying, like this dynamic, right? So then when you stir up and you go off script and not staying to the script that you usually would be, let's say, sticking to, the other person is like, hold on a second, it's not going how it usually goes. What's going on?
This is what keeps patterns in place, right? It's predictable. This is what's giving us a sense of, well, I would say almost fake peace. That it's all fine as long as it's predictable, and then all of a sudden you're becoming unpredictable. Yes, they're gonna have a reaction. I don't know if it helps in this case, but what we're seeing on the long run is that if we're doing that, if we're being more true to ourselves and being more brave from what we truly value, is that people do appreciate it. over time. It becomes this investment in a relationship instead of something else. It becomes a bit of a gift because at least you're providing clarity.
Yeah.
Which
absolutely.
is a gift.
Yeah. Fake peace. The wording, really interesting. A question from Louise. What would be your suggestions or thoughts to rebuild courage and self-confidence when it's been close to a 1? For example, in case of burnout recovery.
Yeah, great question. I think there's a good reason why it's home to me as well, because first couple of years I was very much into how to get people back after a burnout. Well, of course, here at OpenUp we're much more focused on burnout prevention in the first place, but I had I'd say the privilege of seeing many people on their journey there. And one of the things that always made me really sad is when people moved very quickly. So they were like, no, I can do this again, and I'm a hard worker, and I want to be a hard worker again, and they dove in, and then a few weeks later, we were having the same conversation, and that would really sort of, well, for lack of a better word, be really sad for all of us.
Yeah.
Right? So this is why I wanted to introduce that little 4% here as well, because it's so important to build that in a positive spiral. What are these small steps that we can be doing? The sweet spot that I was often looking for with my clients there was, are you bored? And if you're bored, good, then we're going to do a small step. If you're not bored yet, we're not going to make a step.
Okay.
So it's one of these things, because people know the feeling of boredom. So you're doing your thing, and you started after burnout, you started maybe working 2 hours a day again. Good, you're doing that, and you're at the end of the 2 hours thinking, so now what? Great, that's where we want to be. Only then are we building. Small steps, looking for boredom before moving on. Because we tend to overextend ourselves. And especially if you're burnout, there's a good chance there's already this tendency within you. Don't. See if you can build it back in a balance.
Little steps. That's the key. Little steps.
Yeah.
Lucy asks, what advice would you give when we are afraid of judgment from others?
Well, I think it's to look at what is this judgment of others. Because we may see it as a real tangible thing, right? Sort of, to me, the image comes to mind, like a bunch of people saying, you suck at this. I don't know. This is what automatically comes to my mind. And this is important to realize that's what it is. It's a lemon, right? It's just a thought that pops up. And it's a thought that could be examined. And more classical psychological theory would say so. Let's see if we can disprove this entire thought. Like what makes you think judgment would be there? How likely would you think it's to happen? And that's one approach, right? I'm personally more a fan of the lemon approach, as I now coined it, is to take this entire thought and realize it's just a thought that pops up. We have 1 million thoughts every day. It's not exactly true, but there's studies saying that's 40,000. Some say 60,000. It's a lot of thoughts in a day, right? So instead of trying to debate there, I would say, well, it's just one thought that floats on by. And it doesn't mean that your fear is invalid or it shouldn't be there, but it's important to let the sort of cognitive, the thought aspect of that float on by. That leaves you with just a vague sense of anxiety, probably, for something that's there. And then we can notice that and sort of give some space to that, as I did with my feeling of sort of disappointment. Just make some space for that feeling. Yeah. Not all the thoughts that are around it, or lashing out, or all the other behaviors that I probably wanted to do, is just sit with that feeling for a little bit. And then, of course, it's a masterclass about confidence and courage. To find that courage, to be inspired, and to start moving, and to do the thing anyway. You may get, because you may be right, you may get the judgment, you may not get the judgment. There is really only one way of finding out. Don't step into the trap that our mind lays, that it's telling you that it can predict the future, because it really can't. Your mind is just doing its best, but it can't predict the future.
And sometimes it sure feels like it.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Speaking of thoughts, there's also another question in line with this from Fabiola. Any tips on how to stop all the overwhelming thoughts you have before doing something you want to, but of course feel afraid of doing?
Yeah, very good. Yeah, we on this topic of diffusion, we only sort of skimmed the surface here. This is, and this is one of the things you originally had into it. It was a much more theoretical approach that we had as first, which the people that taught me how to use these methods would scold me for, because it's my pitfall to become very theoretical. It's practicing this. So there is, next to the I'm having the thought that, for instance, it could be very useful to literally write down your thoughts. And by that, I don't mean I want to create a narrative, but really take a second, whenever these things happen, write them down as they come. And what you're probably going to find, it's a bit of a jumbled mess. And this sometimes helps you in sort of seeing that, like, whoa, there's so much stuff going on here. That's fine. And then take a breather. See if you can refocus that not just on the content of your thoughts that you're having, but on something else, your breath, for instance, or even to take a very attentive sip of your water, whatever it may be. Get that focus on our mind and get it to where you actually want it to be, which is probably present. Yeah. In my case, what I did just before we got live here, I tried to really focus on the lens of the camera there. That helps me. Because then I'm busy with, that's where I want to be right now, and I don't want to be thinking about what if I missed this part of my story. It doesn't help.
Yeah, definitely.
Which, again, last thing there, it doesn't mean that I don't have the thought. It's still there. Yeah. But that's fine. I'm just going to let that sit here with the other 40,000 that's going to come by in a day, right?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because oftentimes, and I definitely see this in myself too, like, for example, you're sharing the exercise, when the thoughts come, write it down. And like, when you think about it, it sounds very simple, right? Oh yeah, sure, I'm gonna write down my thoughts. But it's incredible, I think, how many times we dismiss an exercise because it's so simple, yet we dismiss it without even practicing it for a long time. But I think it's like you're saying, it's really, if you start doing it and get into a habit, that's kind of like where the results come, instead of just saying, oh yeah, I haven't even tried it, but it kind of sounds like it's easy, so probably it's not going to work.
yeah, exactly. I think we have this tendency to be very married to this notion of, if I feel bad, it must be really big.
Yeah.
It's often not really big. It's fine. We get hurt a lot. We're humans. That's fine. That's part of the experience. And there's other ways as well. If you don't like writing particularly, there's this thing where you repeat the most hurtful thought you have in a weird voice, or you sing it, or you make it into a rhyme, whatever it is. We're trying to sort of get that distance, get less fused with this notion.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Yes, another question from Anna. How to handle feeling of not enough confidence at work, and how to share it with the boss without them thinking of us as not qualified enough.
Very good. I think the answer is in the question, by which I mean to separate the two. So what we're often doing, this is a clear example of fusion, right? We're fusing our sense of competence with the actual competence. Yeah. It's sticky. And what we're trying to do is unstick them. So first we look at what is the actual results that we're trying to achieve here, whatever your work will be. If you have no answer to that, that's your first mission, right? Make sure, am I doing this in accordance to what we said we would do? If there's unclarity there, always, maybe I'm too pragmatic, but I'd love to have that. What is the end result of what I'm trying to do here? What are my markers for knowing that I have a good job? If you're more self-guided, this is where sort of my own to-do list becomes at the end of the day. Only I don't start it with, what do I have to do today? I'm asking myself, when could I be satisfied with today? And it yields a different result. Because all of a sudden, there's usually only 2 or 3 things there. And then my to-do list is still 12 things, right? So I try to start with these. And then at the end of the day, I can be super satisfied with myself because I did 8. But if I just did the list, then I would be disappointed because out of the 11, I only did 8. So this is where you can sort of toy around with this notion. And then whatever comes next to that, which is maybe something you want to discuss with your boss, is that I don't feel there's a mismatch then there, if there is. So if you're not providing that quality, then the question should probably be, how do I get to this quality or this input that I'm getting, which is a conversation you're going to get with your boss. If your boss says, no, you're doing great work, then share that. Like, it doesn't feel that way. And then see what you would need to make that feel that way more. Perhaps you're not getting enough recognition from that. Perhaps you're just not checking in often enough. See what kind of arrangements you can make together with your manager to, get there.
Great tips.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Joachim, for the Q&A, for the masterclass. Really interesting. I think the next time I see a lemon, I'm going to be thinking about your technique. And thank you all viewers for joining us. We also have a course that you can do at your own pace. It's going to pop up on the screen if you would like to check it out. And we will see you in the next masterclass. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.